a small cardboard box, inside it a coffee cup, a phone charger, one thin folder of papers. That was everything Ryan carried as he walked out of the front doors of Meridian Holdings, the company his own family controlled, while behind him, laughter drifted across the office floor. Not loud laughter. Just the kind people allow themselves when they believe the fight is already over. Near the exit, his supervisor Nadia Cole stood with her arms folded and a small satisfied smile on her face. She had won. That's what she believed. Ryan stepped outside, set the box on the railing and took out his phone. He made one call. His voice didn't shake, it didn't rise. He said only, "Let go of every one of them." Within the hour, the department he'd just been fired from would begin to unravel from the inside. 3 weeks earlier, Ryan had walked into that same building as a nobody, badge, plain clothes, and a name nobody recognized. That had been the entire plan. Ryan had spent years abroad doing unglamorous consulting work, fixing broken supply chains, restructuring teams no one wanted to touch. It taught him more than any executive meeting ever had. So when his father, Walter Cross, the man who had spent 40 years turning a small logistics company into an empire, told him it was time to take over, Ryan didn't ask for a corner office. He asked for a regular desk and a standard badge. Walter had one condition for whoever succeeded him: they had to understand the company from the bottom, not the top. Ryan agreed instantly. It was how he'd always worked. On a Monday morning he showed up in plain trousers and an ordinary shirt, introduced himself to HR as a temporary operations hire, and was pointed toward the 9th floor without a second glance. That was exactly the point, to be invisible. The 9th floor ran the company's daily operations, coordinators, analysts, compliance staff, the people who kept everything connected. If something was rotten in the culture of Meridian Holdings, it would show up here first. His new manager was Nadia Cole, mid-40s, sharp and comfortable in a job she'd mastered long ago. On his first day she barely looked at him before dumping a stack of overdue compliance files on his desk and walking off. The data was a mess, mismatched formats, missing sources, duplicate entries. Tedious, not difficult. Ryan spent his first day quietly fixing it while the floor moved around him. He noticed the social structure fast. Nadia sat at the center, flanked by 2 loyalists, Ray Doyle, loud and always ready with a comment disguised as a joke, and Priya Shah, quieter but sharper, always reading the room, always aligning with power. Everyone else orbited outside that circle. By the end of his first week, Ryan had quietly finished work that had originally been split between 4 people. He said nothing about it, just uploaded clean, organized reports and moved on. 2 days later he overheard Ray bragging to Nadia about a vendor report that compliance had praised. The very report Ryan had spent 12 hours rebuilding. Ray took full credit without blinking. Nadia nodded, forwarded the email to leadership and copied Ray. Ryan's name wasn't anywhere in it. He wasn't angry, he was taking notes. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated itself with almost mechanical precision. Anything Ryan did well got claimed by Ray, Priya, or Nadia herself. Anything that went wrong, a late reply, a misfiled document, landed back on his desk whether he'd touched it or not. There was an unwritten rule on the floor. Mistakes needed a name attached before they reached Nadia. And that name was always someone with the least power to argue back. One afternoon, a compliance analyst named Ruth made a small, easily fixed formatting error. Nadia called her out loudly, in front of the whole floor, letting her voice carry just enough for everyone to hear. Ruth apologized calmly, then sat frozen at her screen for a long moment after Nadia walked away, the practiced stillness of someone who'd learned that any visible reaction would be used against her later. There was a quieter cruelty too, lunch invitations spoken just loud enough for Ryan to overhear, then finalized without him. Questions in meetings crafted not to gather information but to expose gaps. Last-minute deadlines dropped at 4:50 p.m. with no context, designed to fail. None of it on its own was enough to report. That was exactly the point. Each incident looked small. Together, they formed something deliberate. Ryan ran early every morning before sunrise, using the quiet to think. What he was watching wasn't ordinary office friction, it was a managed system. The mistreatment on this floor had structure, hierarchy, and an unspoken agreement about who was protected and who wasn't. People who didn't belong to the inner circle either played along or stayed silent, because silence was the only safety the environment allowed. He thought about his father's company, not as an heir, but as someone who studied how organizations actually work. A company could look flawless on paper, strong numbers, a good reputation, while quietly rotting floor by floor, one silenced employee at a time. His father always said the company's real value wasn't on a balance sheet, it was whether people inside it trusted each other. Ryan had believed that his whole life. Now he was seeing exactly what it looked like when it wasn't true. In his third week, Nadia handed him something bigger than usual, leading documentation for a sensitive internal audit. Ryan built the entire tracking system from scratch, finished 2 days early, and, reasonably, professionally, shared access with Nadia and Ray so the team could keep working on it. He wouldn't understand until later how badly that decision would be turned against him. On a Thursday morning, Ryan found Nadia, Ray and Priya already gathered behind the closed blinds of Nadia's office, along with HR Director Elena Voss. Elena stepped out and asked him to come in. She told him a large volume of protected client data had been accessed and pulled from the audit system in the last 2 days, and the access had come through his own login. There was, she said, a clear digital trail. The company could not continue employing him. Ryan asked to see the trail. Nadia said legal was holding it for review. He asked if there was a way to contest it. Elena said the situation required immediate termination. Final, no appeal. She slid a form across the desk. He read it, signed it, thanked her, and asked for a copy, which she gave him. He didn't argue. He didn't look at Nadia or Ray. He packed his mug, his charger, his one folder into a small box, walked to the elevator and left through the front doors into the afternoon light. The same walk that opened this story. Sitting in the parking structure with the box beside him, Ryan called the company's general counsel, Marcus Webb, who picked up almost instantly, a sign his father had already reached out. Ryan gave him 3 instructions: place every email, access log and performance record from the last 4 years under legal hold, convene the board within the hour, and find out exactly who had really pulled that data. He wasn't angry. He'd watched this pattern build for 3 weeks and nothing about it surprised him anymore. What he felt was something closer to clarity, the kind that comes when a problem you've been studying finally shows its full shape. He drove home, changed, and was back within the hour, this time riding the private executive elevator straight to the top floor, where his father was already waiting. Walter Cross stood at the head of the table, refusing to sit while agitated, as he always was in moments like this. Legal counsel and 2 board members joined by video. Elena Voss, the HR director who'd delivered Ryan's termination hours earlier, sat quietly at the far end, visibly aware her position in the room had shifted. Ryan laid it all out without notes. The stolen credit, the manufactured blame, the fabricated breach. He told them about Ruth, about the impossible 450 deadlines, about the report Ray had taken credit for. Within 30 minutes, legal had the real answer. The data extraction had used Ryan's login credentials, but from a device he had never touched. The IP traced straight back to Ray Doyle's own workstation. Someone had simply used Ryan's access from Ray's machine, unsophisticated, but effective, because no one had ever seriously checked. Walter asked Ryan how he wanted to move forward. Ryan wanted the full company meeting to go ahead exactly as planned, with the evidence presented, and his identity revealed only on stage, not before. Word went out company-wide, a mandatory all-hands meeting at 4 p.m., regarding the company's future leadership, nothing more. On the 9th floor, Nadia held court by the windows, hinting that changes like this usually reward people who've proven their value. Ray laughed along. None of them connected any of it to the termination they'd engineered that morning. At 4 p.m., Walter Cross walked onto the stage in the atrium and spoke about 40 years of building this company, and about the most important decision he had left to make. He said the next leader of Meridian Holdings had been working inside this building, unnoticed, for 3 weeks. Then he called his son up. Ryan walked out in the same clothes he'd been fired in that morning. The room went completely silent, the specific silence of hundreds of people, trying to process something they had no framework for. From the platform, Ryan watched Nadia's expression shift in real time, recognition, calculation, and then something with no clean name. He didn't gloat. He introduced himself plainly, explained why he'd started as an ordinary employee, and said the 3 weeks had taught him things that now required immediate action. Then he handed the floor to Marcus Webb, who explained, without naming anyone from the stage, that a fabricated data breach had been used to wrongfully terminate an employee, that a broader pattern was under review, and that several people were suspended effective immediately. After the meeting, Ryan stayed behind and read the 12-page preliminary summary standing right there in the emptying atrium. It was worse than what he'd personally witnessed. 4 years of manipulated evaluations, employees pushed out after raising complaints, credit systematically rerouted away from the people who'd earned it. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt the weight of a decision not yet made, one that would define what kind of leader he actually intended to be, not for himself, but for everyone who had spent years making themselves smaller just to survive that floor. By 6 a.m. the next day, Ryan was back at his desk, reviewing the completed 4-year audit with Marcus. It confirmed everything and more. At least 11 employees held back through rigged evaluations, complaints quietly buried instead of investigated. 1 employee who'd left after a suspicious bad review, another quietly transferred away, one who'd taken a settlement and never been followed up with. Ryan considered every name individually, including 2 people who had originally been targets themselves before choosing to align with the system, rather than resist it. That history didn't excuse them, but it complicated the picture. He decided Elena Voss would stay on under a formal review rather than immediate termination, since her exact role, active suppression versus simple failure to escalate, wasn't fully clear from the record. A harder line but the right one. In the end he approved terminations for Nadia Ray Priya and 4 others whose involvement the audit confirmed, each with a specific, documented reason, not a vague generic notice. He asked that the employees who'd been pushed out over the years be personally contacted and made whole, with care, not speed. That morning Ryan rode down to the 9th floor for the first time since his firing. He gathered the remaining team in the open floor space. No podium, no distance. He told them plainly. The audit was done, the decisions were final, and he wasn't there to ask for their approval, only to make sure they heard it from him directly. All performance records from the last 4 years would be independently reviewed before being used for anything. A new reporting channel, bypassing management entirely, would open within the week. Ruth raised her hand and asked if this would affect decisions already made. Promotions denied, roles people had been passed over for. Ryan said yes, that was the point. Someone else asked if people who'd simply stayed silent would be punished. Ryan said no, staying quiet in that environment hadn't been neutral, it had been survival, and he wasn't interested in punishing people for a calculation the system had forced on them. What he wanted was to make sure no one ever had to make that calculation again. Over the following days, Ryan walked floor after floor, unannounced, having the same honest conversation everywhere. What happened, what was changing, what people could expect from him now. He didn't ask anyone to trust him. He just told them what he was doing and let his actions speak after. Nadia called once, opening with justification rather than apology, pressure from above, a competitive environment she said she'd inherited. Ryan listened without interrupting, then told her the pattern went back 4 years and wasn't the result of outside pressure. It was a sustained choice that had cost real people their careers. The decision stood. Ray never called. Priya's lawyer sent a written appeal. Legal answered with the relevant sections of the audit attached. By the end of the week, the independent review was underway. A new reporting line was active, and 2 employees who'd been unfairly passed over were quietly offered a second chance. Most never told the full reason why. On Friday, Walter came in unannounced, just to walk the building with his son, asked questions, mostly listening. Near a window on the top floor, he admitted he'd feared for years that something was coming apart beneath him. He just couldn't see it from where he sat. Ryan said he understood that now, and that he intended to stay close to the ground, to keep watching what was actually happening, rather than trusting only the reports. That evening, once the floor had emptied, Ryan finally brought the cardboard box up from his car. He set the mug on the windowsill, plugged in the charger, filed the folder away. Small things, but they were what he'd carried out of a place that had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong there. Worth keeping in view. A leader isn't remembered for the moment they reveal their power. They're remembered for what they do with it, who they protect, who they make whole, and what they leave behind for everyone who's still there long after the names on the termination notices are forgotten. Ryan had walked through that front door in plain clothes, asking for nothing but an ordinary desk. The real work was only just beginning, but it had started honestly. and that was the only foundation worth building on.